Good morning, everybody, and welcome to On Texas Football, presented by Adam Lowy and the Lowy Law Firm. I'm your host, Blake Monroe, where I'm joined each and every morning by Bobby Burton and CJ Vogel, and lots to talk about this morning, guys, so we're going to jump right into it. Let's start with the return of David Benda. Bobby, how big is that for Texas?
Well, I think it's huge. I think that, we talk about the value of experience in college football. You saw it on display on Monday night with Michigan. What did they have? 10 guys with starting experience returning on their defense from last year. It's just one of those things. A 22-year-old is different than an 18-year-old 9 times out of 10, right? Yes, there are the Anthony Hills of the world and the Xavier Worthies that come on and play early like that, but they are few and far between comparatively. David Benda is a runway to a younger player eventually, but Texas needed that jump start or that soft landing pad, I guess. And I think it's huge for the Longhorns to be able to do that. My take on it, and CJ and I talked about this as well, is look, he is as good as you're going to get in the portal, most likely for run defense, and he knows your defense. He'll be able to create some continuity on the team as well as team leadership. He's well respected by his teammates because he stuck it out. He wasn't a guy that took the easy path. He could have easily done that last year. He could have easily done it this go round and followed Jeff Choate to Nevada and been a starter, and I just think that this is a big deal overall for the Longhorns, and I'm happy for David Benda that he's coming back to Austin for another year.
Hey, Bobby, who are some of the other people that have announced already that they're returning? And can you talk about their impact as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you start with Jake Majors and Alfred Collins and Barron Sorrell. Those are the 3 primaries that have announced. Of course, we're waiting on Quinn Ewers. That's going to be a pretty large one as well. But Majors, the starting center, 3-year starter. Alfred Collins, certainly with the need at defensive tackle right now, is a big one for Texas. And Barron Sorrell is a 2-year starter as well that's returning. Some people had thought he might go late in the draft or be an undrafted free agent, but I think he made the right decision to return as well. Then you're waiting on Quinn Ewers, as we mentioned, but really the one that everybody's kind of on pins and needles about right now is Jahdae Barron. The star out of Pflugerville that started 2 years now for Texas and been a very good player for Texas at that star position, CJ and Blake. He is expected to make a decision any minute or any day now, and he's said to be 50-50 between staying and going back. And we talk about experience. Having that additional experience in the secondary next year could be huge for the Longhorns, who are bringing in another guy that's got 3 years starting experience in Andrew Makuba, but it gives them the versatility to move people around. And I think that Barron's decision could be a real key. I think Benda's decision was huge, in my opinion, because, we talk about Jalen Ford, how he tied the front end of the defense to the back end of the defense. Well, Anthony Hill's going to have another person to learn from now. He's not just going to be left to the dogs a little bit. You know what I mean? With a new linebackers coach, by the way, too. And so I think that is one of those, segues that can be really, really positive for the Longhorns.
All right, guys. Well, some other big news right now is the portal, obviously still ongoing there. And I know that we're awaiting a couple of decisions from a couple of portal transfers. CJ, can you give us the latest on that?
Yeah, right now, a little bit of a waiting game for the Texas staff. They hosted 2 big-time official visitors last week. Liberty wide receiver CJ Daniels, great name, as we've all talked about previously this week, and obviously defensive tackle Jamari Caldwell. Both are figuring to be the top targets on the board for the Texas Longhorns, who, went out right away and wanted high quality or caliber, high production replacements for the guys that left for the NFL this past week. And Tavondre Sweat, Byron Murphy, Jordan Whittington, A.D. Mitchell, and obviously Xavier Worthy. So that's where Texas is at right now. Oregon State wide receiver Silas Bolden, a bit of a different wide receiver than what Texas is recruiting, and CJ Daniels is set to take an official visit this weekend to Austin as well. So a lot going on. Jamari Caldwell in Texas is down to Texas and Oregon in that little race right now. And then obviously Auburn and Florida are in the mix as well for CJ Daniels. So a lot going on. Texas would benefit greatly from landing both of those recruitments at the moment. And as we talked about, they would be instant impacts at positions of much need at the moment.
Kendrick Blackshire also expected in this weekend, the linebacker out of Alabama, originally from Duncanville. Good morning, Jeffrey. He's another guy that you can add to the visit list this weekend. I'm not so sure there's not going to be one or two others at this point. Also, some news on Jamari Caldwell. I did a little more digging. And while Oregon is a real possibility for him, I'm being told that the University of Houston and a return there might be a possibility. So he might actually be thinking about withdrawing his name from the portal. So this is a three-way go right now for Texas. Either he stays in the portal and he chooses Texas or Oregon, or he stays at the University of Houston, who Willie Fritz retained his defensive line coach. The Jamari Caldwell's former defensive line coach at U of H, who after Dana Holgorsen was fired, typically they fire all the assistants. Well, they retained the defensive line coach. We'll see if that plays a factor in Caldwell's ultimate decision. That is a big, in my opinion, a big key recruit right now for Texas, because I don't know of any other defensive tackle they're really in on prior to this portal window closing.
We're going to take a couple of portal questions real quick before we move on here, guys. And this one from R. Charnell, he says, I'm checking in from Jinx, Oklahoma, but heading to Claremore this morning. Is there a chance that Texas could take both the Liberty and Oregon State wide receivers as they fill different roles? Do y'all see that being a possibility?
Man, I think Texas, I don't know about that. They're going to be tight on numbers as is, given some of these returnees. And maybe not as many guys went in the portal as perhaps Texas was thinking might, too, by the way. So on the outgoing nature of it, I would say that right now I only see Texas really choosing one from this group of guys. A couple of guys they were looking at, one of whom is LeJontay Wester. He actually committed to Colorado yesterday, so take him off the list as of right now. They are still looking at Dorian Singer, the wide receiver out of USC. As well as for a possible visit, but I have not gotten confirmation on any confirmed visit date for him in Texas. I think they've got to only choose one. That's my general feel, because they have other needs that may be as pressing or more, including defensive tackle and including secondary if Jahdae Barron elects to go pro. If Jahdae Barron does not elect to go pro, I don't think they're going to push as much in the secondary.
And then that was actually going to kind of answer this question here from Crowston ITA. He said, with all the DBs we've lost, isn't that a need for us?
Yeah. So. Well, and remember, though, they brought in Andrew Makuba already.
Yeah.
And he has versatility. So he can play safety or nickel. He started 2 years at nickel, 1 year at safety. He's actually a safety freshman All-American. Okay. He's been playing nickel the last 2 years. Has that been out of position for him? Is he better at safety? That's a good question. But he gives them that position versatility. If Barron returns, I don't necessarily see them going for another portal guy in the secondary. They could, but I don't think it's a prerogative or a necessity, especially since, there are thoughts that Jalen Gilbo was going to transfer too, guys. And if he would have transferred, then there's absolutely no doubt. But with Austin Jordan, Jalen Gilbo returning, then Derek Williams coming back, Jelani McDonald's move full-time to safety, Warren Roberson, a young guy at corner, and then you have the 5 incoming defensive backs from high school ranks. Look, they want to be experienced. There's no reasons, we've said this 100 times, there's no reason in today's college football to be inexperienced, woefully inexperienced. If Jahdae Barron comes back, pair him with Andrew Makuba, you're not, in Terrence Brooks and Manny Muhammad, you're not inexperienced. You may be many things, but you're not inexperienced. You also have Derek Williams back, Michael Taft. All those guys saw a considerable amount of time last year.
And then, Bobby, one other portal question. Bobby T.D. Brown says, we need defensive tackles for sure. Maybe after spring ball, as Nolan's still out there. Obviously not on that one. But is Texas going to be going after any defensive tackles? And then what's the latest with high school recruiting when it comes to defensive tackles?
Well, so here's the thought process. First of all, Walter Nolan's committed to Ole Miss. Texas, after talking to him once, decided not to pursue. Make of it what you will. in that capacity. But they would love to sign a defensive tackle in the portal. They're after Jamari Caldwell hard right now, the young man out of University of Houston. The question is whether or not he's going to jump on board, stay at Houston, go to Oregon, etc. Like I just called it a three-way go. That's kind of where it's at right now. Okay, so that's number one. Number two is, they're bringing in two mid-year guys from high school ranks. DeAndre Robinson out of Orlando, Alex January out of Duncanville. I think January has a chance to be ready for this fall. Robinson is a little bit more of a raw prospect, maybe a little bit more explosive, but has more work to do. I would hate to see Texas rely on those guys heavily heading into the SEC. That's just my opinion. The problem that they found is, like, there are guys going to Florida State right now that Texas wasn't really interested in. Texas was interested in Isaiah Rakes, the young man out of Texas A&M transfer that ended up committing to USC yesterday. They just couldn't get him on campus. I think the A&M to Texas thing was just a little too much for Isaiah Rakes to take. And so that's where that is at right now. They are absolutely on the look for a defensive tackle in the portal.
All right, guys, we'll take some more portal questions here in a minute and a lot more questions, so be sure to get them in. But, Bobby, before we move on to those questions, I'm going to let you tell everybody out there about Adam Lowy and the Lowy Law Firm.
Yeah, Adam is a friend of the program, been with us from almost the start. We really appreciate him and his company. He's been helping injured Texans for decades. 512-280-0800 or visit him at loweylawfirm.com. If you've been injured in a wreck, motorcycle accident, truck accident, whatever the case may be, give him a shout if you think he might be due compensation or consideration. One thing to mention, Adam and his firm do a free consultation. So no documents signed, no guarantees or anything like that. Call them, talk to them, see what the situation is. 512-280-0800.
I want to thank him for sponsoring each and every Wednesday right here on Coffee and Football. And we're going to go back to the wide receiver talk for a second, because Ryan from Shiner says, why is Texas going after Silas? Golden does all that kid does and is bigger. Can y'all talk about that dynamic there?
Steve Sarkisian likes touchdowns. Let me is it possible is it possible Silas is a replacement for Keelan Robinson? Think about it that way, as opposed to a replacement for Xavier Worthy, as opposed to a replacement for A.D. Mitchell, Jordan Whittington. That's my take on it. Like I said, scores touchdowns, moves the chains, has elite acceleration. I like it, man. There's a reason USC, Washington, Arizona, all those teams are after him too, guys. CJ, you had something to say, I think.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, watch him play, turn the film on. He's, electric with the ball in his hands. He has dynamic speed and change of direction ability. Sarkisian likes those type of players in his offense. And you can see, just how often he used Keelan Robinson, kind of those gadget sets. I think the last 2 weeks of the season, he had 4 touchdowns on about 7 touches. So that's how unique of a prospect Silas Bolden is. And he's more than, just what Keelan Robinson was limited to in the Texas offense to begin with, which is encouraging when you talk about how thin the Texas wide receiving room is expected to be, or is at the moment right now heading into 2024. So there will be a larger path to carve out in this Texas offense should Bolden pick Texas, but the speed and the change of direction ability is, amongst the tops in the entire portal at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, touchdown scorers, man. I mean, we talked about this too, CJ. Steve Sarkisian, one of the things that Steve Sarkisian does a really good job of is scheming up guys to be in open space. And one of the things he uses to get them in that open space is just sheer speed and acceleration. How many times, let's talk about Jaden Blue, for example. How many times did they throw a quick screen pass or any not screen necessarily, but just a pass to the flat to Jaden Blue, where his job wasn't necessarily to take on a linebacker and try to run through him, but it was to run past him, right? and to use his speed to get the corner. Now, yes, it may only been an 8-yard gain or whatever, but that was the whole idea of the play. Those kind of guys, you don't necessarily get that with other guys in the portal. You may not get that with CJ Daniels, for example, right? I mean, the other portal guy he's fast, but he's not that 40-yard dash elite fast, And so I think that we look at it, and you got to see Sark likes pieces to the puzzle, man. And he talked about versatility in his offense all year long in various ways he could beat you, and the team could beat you, whether that was through the air or through the run game, through the deep ball, through the short methodical drives. That requires a lot of pieces of the puzzle. And I think that he sees Silas Bolden potentially as a piece to that puzzle, just like he does CJ Daniels, just like he does Matthew Golden.
Absolutely.
Well, let's take a portal detour here for a second and talk about Tre Wisner, because he's coming up quite a bit in the chat. He really came on strong there toward the end of the season when he got those touches. And AJJ Sports says, I was really hoping they'd use Tre Wisner in that Robinson role. And then Antonio Harris also added, Tre Wisner does the same thing, in my opinion. So what about Tre Wisner?
I love the kid. So he is one of those guys. I know the name that's going to scare y'all. I'm going to mention who he reminds me of, and old-time Texas fans are going to go, Bobby's off his rocker a little bit, because this guy was so special. And that's Jamal Charles. Because he pinballs like Jamal Charles. Like, people don't get square hit. Jamal never got a square hit on him in his entire career at Texas. I mean, and maybe not even in the NFL, by the way. And Tre Wisner seems to be that kind of guy, yet Jamal Charles was tough as nails. I mean, people don't realize how tough Jamal was. And Tre Wisner is the same way. Now, is Tre Wisner going to go and have Jamal Charles type career? I doubt it. He doesn't have Jamal Charles straight up speed. I mean, Jamal was, 4.3. Tre's, I think, 4.4. You know what I mean? I wonder how Sark is planning to use him. I think he could say Savion Red made the move from running back to slot. I think Tre Wisner could make that move. I think Tre Wisner would be an unbelievable cornerback, by the way. I mean, he is a raw piece of clay that I think is just we talk about X factors or wild cards. Don't you think CJ, don't you think he fits that wild card mentality for Sark? Like, what are you going to do with him? Because extracting what you can from him is going to be a positive for the team. He's the wild card guy for me on offense right now.
Yeah, I think you said it best. He's, an unmolded piece of clay, and you can go any which direction with him. I remember going up to Waco Connolly when he was still there his junior year, and Coach Garrick up there told me his favorite Tre Wisner moment was a game in the playoffs that they had in which he had 200 yards rushing and 20 tackles at safety. So if that doesn't tell you just about how kind of broad his future can be and how many variables that he can bring to the football field, I don't know what does. It was that impressive of a showing for Coach Garrett to say that was one of my favorite moments as a coach I've ever watched. I mean, we talked about it on kickoff and punt and all sorts of special teams. He's always the first one down the field. He's that guy that wants to go put his hat on the ball carrier down the field. So like you said, Bobby, the opportunities and ways to use Tre Wisner, limitless.
Yes.
So, in a loaded running back room, if there's a way he can carve out a role, whether it be in the slot or in that niche Keelan Robinson role as well, I'd love to see it. If it's on defense as well, who knows? But at least in my eyes, he's earned a spot he's earned a way onto the field one way or another. He's earned a way through his play freshman season. And I think there's a large role of trust in that as well. I think the Texas coaching staff trusts him in the sense that he's given it his all on the secondary or in the special teams realm of things. It's time for him to go find a true spot for himself somewhere on this team.
I mean, he has the ability to play nickel. He could play corner. I mean, he can run. He can turn. He has ball skills. I think, like I said, I think he's a wild card, but I think he's going to stay on offense. I don't think the coaches will argue that they want to keep him on offense because, again, I think he can score touchdowns. The other thing that I wanted to mention in that conversation, really, guys, is whether it's Wisner or Silas Bolden or whoever. The thing about Wisner is I suspect he will be one of the gunners next year. Keelan Robinson and both your gunners are gone. Keelan Robinson and Keaton Crawford gone. Okay. Without question, I think Tre Wisner is circled as one of the gunners for next year. That's no brainer for me. And Drew M just mentioned that could be also your punt block guy. A lot of truth in that.
All right, y'all, we're going to get back to the portal here for a minute. Now, Bobby, we've heard the name Holden Stays mentioned quite a bit right here on this show, but Ray Potter says, are there any new names on the tight end front, or is it wait and see until spring? And then I'm going to also add in this one from Shake and Bake. He hasn't seen any tight end visits scheduled. Are we good there? So what's the latest on tight end and the portal?
I think that they're trying to get guys in right now. Ben Yurcik of Stanford is a possibility. Holden Stays has committed to Tennessee. He's out of Notre Dame, but Texas was circling back. I don't know where that has gone. I mean, he may be already done and gone for Tennessee at this point and may say so. That wouldn't surprise me. Jordan Jolly out of UConn has been another that they've made initial primary contact with. I would guess at this point, and this was important too. I mean, Juan Davis decided to return, so that gives them some flexibility. The other thing that gives them flexibility, and we mentioned this the other day, is Malik Ogbo. Malik Ogbo moving full-time to tight end could happen this spring. Now, does he get down to 270, from all the way from 350 when he got in and become a bigger blocking tight end? I don't know. But we'll see. I mean, Texas needs to do something at tight end. What they do, though, is undecided at this point. A lot of it depends on who they can get on campus.
All right, y'all. We talked about the portal in depth. So let's talk, and we've talked about just about every position except offensive line, I think. So let's start with that. Phil McIntosh says, what is y'all's thoughts about the right tackle next year? We love Christian Jones, but his years are up, and he struggled more than we'd like for an upperclassman. What do y'all see happening at that spot?
I think first off, it was a tremendous job of development for what Kyle Flood did with Christian Jones since his arrival on campus. I think early on in Christian Jones's career, there was always questions of, will he scratch that starting five? All right, well, now he's in the starting five. Just how high of a ceiling can he, eventually reach? We saw a pretty high ceiling from what we thought we were going to see from Christian Jones. He turned into a very good right tackle for Texas. That gives me encouragement for whoever else is next up at that position. Could some of these guys have a higher ceiling? Potentially. I've always been a big fan of Cameron Williams. I think if you give him, an entire offseason's worth of reps at that, that number one unit, you could be looking at, a future NFL caliber starting right tackle in just, in just 2 years. Cam Williams is that impressive to me. I've seen him since his junior year at Duncanville, where he was seemingly just grabbing people, holding them firm, and throwing them right on the ground like they were trash. Like it was, he was taking the trash out. It was that easy for him because of his size, his strength, and his hands. It was very impressive. So I really like Cam Williams. Bobby, I know that you have tossed around the idea of Hayden Connor moving to right tackle and the two of them duking it out over there, as well as Brandon Baker, who will be the starter, a true freshman coming in just over a couple days as well. So it's a lot of possibilities. I do like the idea of continuing the continuity inside the offensive line with the four guys that we've seen this past year, but at the same time, competition. I mean, I messed up the saying the other day, but iron makes stronger iron, guys. I mean, I'm going to keep it going.
Iron sharpens iron.
I'm going to keep this one going, Bobby.
You want to keep the bad.
I caught enough. Comments afterwards that I was just like, you know what, this might just be, the saying that I keep rolling back to. But you understand my point, no? Is it's point of, there's so much competition on the offensive line right now that you almost can't go wrong with where you go. So
my hat's off to you. You just made Blake laugh. Yeah. So I look, you're right. They are going to try Hayden Connor at right tackle this spring. We know that for a fact. And I think part of it is they're going to the SEC. They think they need guys that are big and quick on the outside. And Hayden Connor, it has been a good left guard for Texas for 2 years. Not bad at all. He's not perfect, right? But Texas won 12 games with him at left guard. So there's some, and talk about an amount of trust. There's an amount of trust there. The problem is he's not necessarily a body mover at guard. He's more of a get in the way and seal people off guard. When you move to the SEC, you need some people to move guys. Okay, that fits more in the Neto Umeozulu, Cole Hudson vernacular, right? Yep. And so I think also Cam Williams needs some competition, some real competition at right tackle to push him to be the best he can be. He can't just be given that job, right? And if you just put a true freshman or a redshirt freshman in there to try to push him, I don't think that's the best situation for Cam Williams to extract the best out of him. And so I definitely think Hayden Connor is going to work at right tackle this spring. We've talked about it, and that's what we believe Hayden's been told that. And so we'll see where they end up, though. To CJ's point, I think is important. Kyle Flood has shown a penchant to be able to create some patchwork and put things together that makes sense. And ultimately, there's a lot of things you can complain about, but where this offensive line is today versus 3 years ago is not one of them. not one of them at all. So I have some trust there. What it will end up looking like is a different story.
We're going to stay on the offensive line questions here for just a minute. Christopher Weatherford says, Bobby, do you see Flood working Brandon Baker as the upcoming swing tackle, possibly a replacement for Banks?
Maybe. I think Texas is really high on two young guys right now at tackle too. Not just Cam Williams, by the way, but Trevor Gooseby and Jaden Chapman. So Brandon Baker fits in that group. I don't know if Baker's going to be a swing tackle. My understanding was during the recruiting cycle, he was told you're starting at right tackle. That's where you're going to go start. We're going to not necessarily starting games, but we're starting your career off there. You're going to get some hard knocks a little bit there, and see what you can really come up with, and see where things wind up after your freshman year. I definitely think that Brandon Baker has the athleticism to play both spots and to move around. And what he has, and one of the reasons why he's a 5-star, okay, is he has the athleticism, the size, etc., to be a couple of different spots, in my opinion. He could be a left tackle, be a right tackle. He's going to start at right tackle. I think left tackle right now, they may be looking for a little bit more arm length, which both Chapman and Gooseby have. So let's wait and see on that.
Hey, real quick, you talked about how far the offensive line has come. We just named off 10 possible, a full, starting lineup and a secondary lineup on the offensive line. And, it's a possibility where the 5-star freshman might not be in that too deep. That's how far the Texas depth has come since this staff has taken over. Isn't that a sigh of relief?
Yeah, I mean, and it goes back to the Pancake Factory. Those guys coming in really added immediate depth, I thought, and gave Texas the opportunity. I mean, look, all seven of them are still on campus,
still here
2 years later. How many positions have taken 7 guys in one class and are still all there 2 years later? Now, Ogbo's moved to tight end ostensibly, but that's pretty impressive as well. And it means none of them were bad players, by the way.
Absolutely.
That was the other thing. I mean, a lot of times you take 7 and only 3 are any good, and you hit that normal hit rate. They hit a higher hit rate with this group, I think.
All right, y'all. Well, plenty of time to get your questions in, so please do just that. We're going to get to as many as we can. But before we get to all of that, Bobby, I need to tell everybody out there about Manscaped. And cheers to the new year from our friends at Manscaped, because your resolutions shouldn't be the only things that are well kept. 2024 is the time for new heights, new opportunities, and a new look for your Times Square balls. Manscaped's Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra is every man's cheat code to look good, feel good, and turn the page on confidence this year. Whether you're looking to maintain a trim or go for that clean-shaven look, this trimmer has you covered. It's trusted by over 10 million men worldwide, and now is your time to get a grip on your grooming with our exclusive offer. Just go to manscaped.com and use code ONTEXAS for 20% off plus free shipping. Happy New Year or Happy New Balls. And introducing the MVP of 2024, Manscaped's 5th generation lawnmower. It's not just a trimmer, it's your grooming sidekick. Equipped with 2 skin-safe blade heads, a standard one for taking a little off the top, and a new foil blade to go smooth wherever your heart desires. It's like having a personal stylist at your fingertips or, well, wherever you need it. And did I mention it's waterproof? Because the trim in the shower is the only way to start your day. And get 20% off and free shipping with the code ONTEXAS at manscaped.com, because nothing says Happy New Year like a deal that leaves your balls and your budget feeling refreshed. Embrace a new you, and definitely embrace a new trimmer courtesy of Manscaped. I want to thank them for being a sponsor of today's show and being one of Bobby's favorite reads of all time.
So, I think whoever writes those ad reads needs to get paid more.
I think they need to hire me to write them, is what I think. Being 100% honest here. So, okay, guys. Well, we got a lot more to talk about, and we're going to jump right into it. And we're going to start with this one. Our apologies to Brandon Huey. We were having some problems with Super Chats yesterday. So we're going to get over to this. And he says, y'all missed my Super Chat yesterday. It was pertaining to Texas being number 2 in the college football playoff predictor on ESPN.
That's for next year. CJ, I saw you make some tweets yesterday. You had some specific thoughts. Let's talk about those.
It's fun to be in this spot, obviously. Texas has done a great job to earn the trust of the writers, the voters, the algorithms, whatever it is that make these, way too early rankings. I do think it's a little high. I think that Texas is losing a lot, and it's a little bit different than, a lot that they lost last year. This is, running backs are great. Running backs can be game changers. Running backs are also largely a product of what is in front of them. And so I think that is why you saw more of a seamless transition from Roschon Johnson and Bijan Robinson, albeit tremendous college running backs, to, Jonathan Brooks running for 1,100 yards in 10 games. That's why C.J. Baxter and Savion Red and Jaden Blue, that's why these guys had, some really, solid rushing outcomes, is because that offensive line stayed the same. While Texas is returning 4 out of the 5 again this year, and they have a talented quarterback returning for a third year, offensively they're they're losing their top 5 pass catchers from a year ago. There's a lot of wide receiving production that is not coming back, and I think that is giving me a little bit more pause than what we saw last year, because you had Xavier Worthy and Quinn Ewers connection coming back. You had the Jatavian Sanders coming back. Obviously, going out and getting A.D. Mitchell, that was a piece that was going to offset, Xavier Worthy out wide and freeing up JT in the middle. You don't really have a JT right now. You don't know right now what connection Quinn Ewers will kind of create with a Matthew Golden or Jonte Cook, who only had 8 catches this year. It's a little bit different of a pause than I had after last year. So I think it's great. Texas's biggest strength on the entire team was stopping the run on the defense. Tavondre Sweat, Terrell Carter, Byron Murphy, Jalen Ford. It's a lot to replace. So I'm a little bit more skeptical about just how high Texas can be right now. I don't, this is not to say they're not a top 10 program in the country. I think that they're going to have the talent to compete with just about everybody in the country. Good teams lose talent every year. There's no telling how many pieces Michigan will lose after this season. I think someone made the tweet that they might lose up to 35 starters from this team alone heading into the 2024 season. But number 2 is a little high for me, Bobby. I don't know. I feel like I might be a little skeptical about this right now.
35 starters. You mean guys that have started games for him? Because obviously there's only 22 starters. I was told preseason that Michigan they think they may have as many as 20 draftable guys. That would break all records, by the way. Just absolutely slaughter them. As far as Texas is concerned, I agree with CJ here. I think 2 is too high. I think that Texas is missing one elite class that is now up on the docket, kind of set. To put this the right way, they're missing the final Tom Herman class was not a great class and had a lot of I don't know, attrition, I guess is the best word. I mean, they just flat left, and so I look at it and I think that they have a lot. This is going to be a junior and sophomore led team next year, as opposed to a senior and junior led team, which is what it was this year. Right. And so the junior and sophomore led team portends to a better, more elite program in 2025 than it does in 2024. It doesn't, however, mean they're going to fall off a cliff. Right. That's what CJ's getting at and what I agree with. Are they number 2 or 3? Quinn would have to make a huge jump, which is entirely possible for Texas to get that high. That's my point. They will have to be a quarterback-centric offense next year for that to be plausible, and they're going to have to get a guy or 2 to step up on the interior. I do think they'll be better in the secondary, especially if Jahdae Barron returns. I think they'll be fine at running back. I think they'll be better at offensive line. I think they'll be down at tight end and receiver, no matter what they do in the portal. And then I think they'll be down at defensive tackle, no matter what they do in the portal. They'll be better at edge, and they'll be about the same at linebacker with another year of Anthony Hill, although I think they lose a team leader in Jalen Ford. So all of that combined together tells me this team is a little down from last year, but it's not a dreadful exercise for Texas next year.
Yeah, Bobby, in that conversation yesterday on Twitter, I got a tweet from Coach Scott who made a really good point, and it was along the lines of, this was kind of the year where the wide receivers and the playmakers kind of carried Quinn at times. That was, kind of what we saw as the year progressed. This year, in year 3, it's time for Quinn to take that step to carry this new wide receiving core. Be that third-year starter in the same system. Be the guy, the upperclassman in the room to walk in, be that leader on the field. So I love that point. I thought it was a tremendous, kind of outlook on expectations because it's absolutely the case. If Quinn can take that leap, all bets are off. Who knows how high this ceiling will go because, we've talked about the talent and the arm strength. It's there. It's all about putting pieces together and obviously making the right plays.
So we got lots of comments in the chat regarding this. And so with the playoffs moving to 12 teams next year, do you see a scenario of Texas getting in at all with them taking 12?
Yeah, I mean, I think 9-3 gets you in the SEC next year, maybe. I mean, so I think Texas has a real chance, and at that point, then what age are you really? Are you a junior or are you a senior? By the time they're game 13 or 14 rolls around of your junior year. So I feel like there's an element there. I think that's a real possibility. I mean, what games is Texas going to not be favored in next year?
Georgia. Well, that's the thing. I'm
2 for sure. Georgia, we think, and Michigan.
I'm thinking if they take care of the games in which they're favored in, if you win one of the 3 against Michigan, Oklahoma, and Georgia, you're set up to be in the college football playoff, like you said, Bobby, regardless of what else happens across the country. You have to win at least one of those 3 and take care of business across the rest of your schedule.
I agree.
Well, let me ask you this, since we're talking about the Georgia and Michigan games. Right now, what do you think that line would be set at when it comes out? Because I don't think it would be much. I mean, normally the home team gets about 2-3 points for being at home, but I don't see it being more than 4 at the most.
Well, does Harbaugh come back? Does McCarthy come back? That'll be, the biggest factor right there for Michigan. I know that they're expected to lose a lot from this year's team, but as we've talked about, good teams replenish, good teams replace. Michigan right now is a big question mark in my eyes right now. I think Texas to Georgia would be probably a 3-point dog even at home. Georgia is just that gold standard right now in terms of continually replenishing their talent cabinet. And so even with being at home, I do think that there are some aspects of the Texas team that are just a little bit too young for me to jump out and say that they will be, a pick-em or favored even against a team like Georgia. And I think Georgia is probably the only team in the country to come to Austin and still be favored. I'll leave it at that. I think Georgia is just that talented.
I would agree with CJ. I think Texas will be favored against OU for sure. The interesting thing about the OU game this year, guys, and I don't know if this has ever happened before, both Texas and OU are completely off the week before Texas OU. CJ, I mean, I've been, I can't remember a time in history when both teams had an off week before they played one another in the Cotton Bowl. And so that's an anomaly at the very least. I would say that the other things to look at here are teams like Kentucky. That's a hard-nosed football team that's coming to Austin. You're going to get some guys that the thing about the SEC is it can be a little bit of a murderer's row even when you don't expect it. Games like Mississippi State can be difficult. Just ask the Aggies. All right. I mean, so, my point being, those kinds of games can be difficult. Just like Iowa State was difficult for Texas, just like Kansas State at times was difficult. They have those teams too that kind of hang around the rim a little bit on you. So it'll be Texas's first foray into the league. We'll see how it all winds up and turns out.
Absolutely.
Okay, guys, we're going to switch gears here. And Jack says, new subscriber. Thank you for subscribing, Jack. We appreciate it. Appreciate you tuning in, as we do everybody. Who are we hoping to add on the second signing date?
Well, there's one guy that Texas has circled, since before the signing, the original signing day, and that was Alex Foster at a Greenville, Mississippi, interior defensive lineman, to go with what has already been a pretty strong interior defensive lineman class for Texas. That right now is who Texas has circled. He's currently committed to Baylor, but Texas was able to get him on campus the week leading up to the first signing day and really started picking up interest and communications with him towards the end of August and October and into early November right there. So Alex Foster out of Greenville, Mississippi. Bo Davis is going to go out and see him this weekend, or as the recruiting period opens up once again here soon. But that right now is the one guy that Texas has their sights circled on. And as you mentioned yesterday, Bobby, these coaches are about to go on the recruiting trail once again. There might be a diamond in the rough somewhere that hasn't yet inked a signature that Texas could make a late push for. But right now we'll have to, kind of sit back and wait for that possibility to unearth itself, because obviously the only guy that, at least I have circled is Alex Foster.
Yeah, the other one, there is one more, but it's a reclassification, and that's Ryan Williams, the wide receiver out of Saraland. He's actually visiting Texas on January 27th on an official visit. His high school teammate, KJ Lacey, who's committed to Texas as a quarterback for the class of 2025, will be coming in with him. He is part of that, but we don't know if Ryan Williams is going to sign on National Signing Day because he reclassified. Williams is committed to Alabama currently, but going to visit Texas and then Auburn as well before he makes a decision. He's not confined by the first signing day date. Like, you can sign anytime after February 7th, and it can be a good signature. So he might take this until April. I've seen a lot of reclassification guys do that in the past. But Alex Foster, as CJ mentioned, a priority. He's an interior defensive lineman, 6'5", 255-ish. Texas really liked what he looked like on the hoof. He actually came in twice, made an official visit the week before signing day, but also CJ and Blake came in for the Tech game as well. Stopped by before going to Baylor the next day. So all of that to be said, very interesting. One other note about Ryan Williams, KJ Lacey coming in this weekend as well. Blake Monroe broke that news a couple of days ago. KJ Lacey, the quarterback, not only visiting Texas on the 27th with Ryan Williams, but also coming into Austin on this weekend, January 13th.
And while we're on the subject of Ryan Williams, guys, Jason says, how important has that recruitment become with the mass departures of the wide receiver room? Does it affect it at all?
Man, I don't know. Look, what Sark is trying to do in the wide receiver room is accumulate touchdowns. That's all I know to say. Like, he's looking for guys that can score. Williams would have been the number one receiver in the country in the class of 2025. Okay. Now, the class of 2024, there's a bunch of good players. So don't get me wrong here. And by accelerating his timeline, is he going to get on the field sooner, or does he have more work to do on his body before he really gets on the field? I'm not sure. I don't know that it changes anything else that Texas is doing, whether it be in high school recruiting or in the portal at this point.
Yeah, there was actually conversations down in Orlando that he might be the best wide receiver in the entire country, regardless of classification. So that's how highly people down there kind of view his talents. So it would be big. It would obviously be another extremely talented wide receiver to that room. Obviously, you'd have to, expect him to get on campus early for him to get in that circle of trust for Steve Sarkisian. That's something that we've talked about pretty often at the wide receiver spot. So I would think a guy like him and a guy like Ryan Wingo, the talent itself will lend itself to seeing them on the field. So how much we'd have to see, obviously, with a spring and an off season, and just how well they understand the dialect in the Texas playbook. But the talent alone would get both of those guys on the field pretty early.
All right, guys. I know we talked about Jamari Caldwell at the beginning of the show. We've had a lot of people join, so we'll kind of rehash that because Jeff has a question. He said, I thought for sure Caldwell would be in the boat already. What are you hearing on that recruitment?
We talked about this briefly. The thought process here is that Caldwell is going to make a decision between Texas and Oregon. Okay. He's in the portal. What has confounded that somewhat, we believe, is the fact that he's now contemplating returning to the University of Houston as well, because the University of Houston retained its defensive line coach even after firing Dana Holgerson and hiring Willie Fritz. And so that is a confounding factor, a complexifying factor, whatever you want to call it. My take on it is, Texas felt very good about this recruitment heading out of the weekend. And now that we're 72 hours away from that, how do they feel now? I think they're anxious. I think they're hopeful, but I think they're anxious too, because this is the guy they kind of circled in the portal at that defensive tackle position, and one they think is an upgrade over a Trill Carter, for example. And so they're excited about him, but he needs to make his decision and figure it out. I was told on Monday that he was on the cusp of a decision. That was the actual quote. Now taking it back, it's been 48 hours. So obviously there's some anxious moments. We'll see what happens. Texas fans should have their fingers crossed on this one, because I do believe it's a very, very key recruitment.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, we're going to stay on the defensive line there for a minute, or the front seven in defense. Shake and Bake says, can you tell us the linebacker / edge depth chart and where everyone projects?
Man.
Well, all right. So here's the issue, right? So you have returning starters in Barron Sorrell, right, and Ethan Burke. Okay. Sorrell has been the jack, which is the wide side defensive end. Okay. He's the one that has been responsible for that. Burke has been the boundary defensive end / whatever they want to call that. They call it the buck position. Okay. This year, Justice Finkley was the backup on both sides. Right. So they basically played a 3-man rotation. All right. So the backup to them was Jamon Tapp. Okay. You add a couple of issues this year. You add a healthy Colton Vosick, okay, that people need to know about. You also add this. You add Trey Moore out of UTSA. He had 14.5 sacks last year. He was recruited specifically for the boundary position, for the buck role, okay? So the same role that Ethan Burke might play. My guess at this point is they could do one of two things. They could move Finkley full-time to Jack and put the boundary into Trey Moore and Ethan Burke's hands, or they could move Ethan Burke full-time to Jack as well, so that when, and this is my take on it right now with Barron Sorrell. Barron Sorrell is he's not a natural pass rusher. He's a grinded out pass rusher. Okay. So he doesn't have these array of moves. He's kind of like push it back, gets there. They could put Burke and Moore on the field at the same time in third and long situations if they move Burke to the jack position in conjunction with Sorrell and get him time there. So I feel like that's the way it may look. Then you have guys like Colin Simmons coming in, Zena Umeozulu, who, frankly, who knows where they're going to end up right now. I mean, Simmons could come in and work his way into serious position, no different than what Anthony Hill did a year ago. You just have to wait and see.
Zena did say down in Orlando, right behind Barron Sorrell is exactly where Jack pictured him.
Yep.
So whether or not that plays out with all these new bodies into this room, we'll have to wait and see. But originally in his recruitment, that is where Texas's staff viewed him originally, fitting in to this Texas defensive end room.
The key for Texas will be they need more production out of that position in 2024. I mean, it's been 3 years. They got better production this year, in all fairness, right? This is the most productive those edges have been in PK's tenure. Next year, they need to take another step. And I think they will. They got more players, more pass rush potential. The two starters are a year older again. So I think they're going to take another step. The question is, how big is that step?
Mm-hmm.
That needs to start becoming a force to get after the passer.
Okay, guys, this next question here is from Bobby T.D. Brown, and he says, does Texas change the defensive scheme if they strike out at defensive tackle? Make it like a 3-4 and be more of a speed defense?
I don't think so. I think this is one of those things where, as important as coaching continuity is, so is scheme. You know, that's one of those things where Texas has a lot of young players to switch up the entire scheme on them and force them to learn an entirely new defense in year one of a brand new conference where you don't know the schemes and tendencies of the opponents that you're playing. I wouldn't say that's necessarily something I would be on board with. Will they fit the defense to, probably be more of a strength to the personnel that they have? Absolutely. That's what good coaches do. But to completely uproot what Texas has done in the last 3 years under PK is something that I don't think would be, suited for them to be in the best position possible year one in the SEC.
I think the bigger issue too there is they don't have the true nose unless Sadir Mitchell's ready to go. So you playing a 3-man front, who are you going to put at nose? Alfred Collins? That ain't going to work. So, I mean, I don't necessarily, even if they go with a speed defense, they don't have the key piece unless they get Jamari Caldwell.
Okay, let's talk about the NFL draft. We have some questions regarding that. And Chris Barr says, guys, predictions on who gets drafted and who is an undrafted free agent.
I love draft draft talk.
Go
this year it's fun. This year it's fun. I mean, I think if you go down the list, you know, Xavier Worthy, Jonathan Brooks, Byron Murphy, Tavondre Sweat, A.D. Mitchell, all guys that are drafted 100%. And then you start kind of getting into does Jahdae Barron depart? He would get drafted. Ryan Watts, I think someone will take a flyer on him. I think he has to test very well, but you're already talking about a guy that's 6'3" and has a history of being a pretty solid coverage guy. The speed is going to be his biggest knock. So a good testing day at the pro day and the combine, things might be a little bit different for him. Then, you know, I think, and I'm going, this has not been based off of any sourcing or conversations behind the scenes. Christian Jones is going to be a guy that I think someone takes a flyer on late in the draft. He's shown enough development over his, 5 years on the field for Texas. This year specifically, I thought even though despite some of his downfalls there was enough, positive moments for Christian Jones. I think midway through the year, PFS was kind of parading him around as one of the guys who had not allowed many sacks or pressures or hurries, whatever it might be, over, X amount of snaps. Like that was one of the strengths that we had seen Christian Jones make. So I think he'll be in that conversation as well. Where I think Texas might fall a little, kind of expectation-wise, kind of upset about Keelan Robinson and Jordan Whittington. Not yet sure Jordan Whittington will have, that entire, career's work of production and snap counts for an NFL team to take that flyer on him. I think the testing will be there, but a strong senior day, a strong, pro day, if he's invited to one of these big Senior Bowl camps, that's going to be a big time stock riser for him going against these guys one-on-one in front of all 32 scouts and more.
I just did a back of the envelope here. I think that at least 7 will for sure get drafted. And now my order of which they get drafted would be my order, not the way a NFL team views them. For example, I think Byron Murphy and Xavier Worthy would be the first 2 drafted. Okay. Some team may find Jatavian Sanders is the best one or Tavondre Sweat but the 7 that I think are for sure drafted guys, Tavondre Sweat, Xavier Worthy, Byron Murphy, Adonai Mitchell, JT Sanders, that's 5. Jonathan Brooks is 6. Christian Jones is 7. To CJ's point, Jordan Whittington and Keelan Robinson, I think, are maybes down low. Robinson is probably an undrafted free agent as a special teamer. Whittington, I think CJ's right. It's going to depend how he does at the Senior Bowl because I do think he got an invite there. Watts, I just don't see him getting drafted. I could be wrong, but I don't see that working out for him because I don't think he's going to test well enough. I don't think he's going to run in the 4.5s. I think he's going to be a 4.6 corner, and they're going to say, "Can you play safety?" And he hasn't proven that he could.
Yeah.
And so he'll be an undrafted guy, in my opinion. Could I be wrong? Absolutely. But I see 7 for sure, and after that is a big question mark. Jahdae Barron going pro, I think, would make it 8.
Okay, real quick, 2 more questions regarding the draft. Rob Hadaway says, with the deadline for the NFL being the 15th, what's the holdup for some of these guys making a decision?
Well, there's really only 2 right now that we're waiting on, Jahdae Barron and Quinn Ewers. Okay, so Quinn Ewers has already made his decision. I mean, that decision's been made. Announcing the decision is a different time. It comes with the potential of an announcement with something else involved. We'll wait and see what exactly that is, et cetera, and how he does it. But it's something to be considered. As far as Jahdae Barron, I think it's just, I mean, CJ, you talked to someone over the weekend. He was just split on what he wanted to do and how he wanted to do it. The thing that I found interesting out of that was he wants to work at corner. He wants some work at corner before going to the pros, maybe. That could be a thought process, not necessarily getting time at safety, but at corner.
Yeah. And then one other question from Felipe Velasquez says, not complaining, but if Makuba is so good after starting 3 years, why isn't he going to the NFL?
It's a good question. I think more of it was departing for the NFL as a junior, unless you were, in that All-American conversation. If your team isn't necessarily having that on-field success, you are then lumped into the downfalls as well. Clemson did not have a great year this year, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I think there's, an opportunity for him to come home and play in front of his family right here in Austin. 2, obviously NIL has been a big part of that as well. And 3, chance to join a defense that was probably a little bit more put together this year and, probably fit him a little bit better schematically since the move down to nickel. It was a little bit of an adjustment period for him. He's only in year 2 of playing nickel. If that's where he remains, that's 3 years of high caliber quality football in which he is at the same position, putting together good tape on the field. So a little bit of all of that mixed in together is why Makuba came back and, is kind of looking to have another strong year under his belt. But again, Bobby, and you mentioned this earlier, if Jahdae Barron does come back and you're able to throw Makuba back deep, his best season, he was a freshman All-American as a safety. So I think that's something to keep an eye on as well.
I think Makuba is not – I think he's a low-round draft pick is the reality of it. We're not saying he's so good. No, I'm not saying Makuba is a first or second round draft pick. Okay, so if you got that feeling from the way I've been talking about him, let's reset expectations. I think if he were to go this year, he'd be a 5th, 6th, 7th round draft pick. Would he get drafted? Yes, I think he would. That's good enough, guys. That's pretty darn good, right? We're talking about Jahdae Barron would be a 4th, 5th, or 6th round draft pick right now. And we're wanting him to come back. So level set with me a little bit here. Everybody, when we say they're good, it doesn't mean we think they're a top 15 draft pick or a first rounder.
Okay, before we move on, Bobby, I'm going to let you tell everybody out there about Adam Lowy and the Lowy Law Firm.
Yeah, absolutely. Adam's our friend. He is a lawyer in Austin area, but he does things throughout the state. He's been helping injured Texans for the last couple of decades. UT law grad. Give Adam a call if you've been injured in a car wreck, motorcycle accident, anywhere that you think you might be due compensation or a discussion about it at the very least. Give him a call, 512-280-0800, or visit him at loweylawfirm.com. That's loweylawfirm.com. Again, what they do is there's no signed paperwork or anything like that. The first call is a absolutely free consultation, and they decide, and you decide whether or not it's worth it working together. Give him a call, 512-280-0800, or visit him at loweylawfirm.com. Once again, we appreciate him and his ongoing support of On Texas Football.
For sure. Okay, guys. Well, the college football season just came to a close on Monday with the national championship. But for Texas, it's about to get started again already. And Jaden Blue tweets out, back to work in 7 days. Bobby, can you give a little insight on the schedule going forward for the Longhorns?
Yeah, they're getting ready to get back to winter workouts. This team reports, I believe, the 14th. Classes start on the 16th. So that's kind of when classes start, that's when the guys get back to work. The early morning workouts before the crack of dawn these days in the winter months is interesting. But I look, spring ball will start in March, almost assuredly. It has the last couple of years. And then they'll take a week off after spring break. Then they'll get back at it and go 2 to 3 times a week. I personally am a big believer in the way Sark does this because I think it keeps them in football mode over a longer period of time. And that's healthy. That gives them more team camaraderie, more throwing the football around in between practices. So they're not tired when they go to practice. That's another big piece. Like when you split it into 2 practices or 3 practices a week, they have more time to heal from nicked up injuries. The NCAA allows 15 total practices for spring practice. So by splitting that over 5 weeks, and actually 6 weeks if you include spring break, I think it splits up the monotony for the kids a little bit too. And so they're not just always working out in the morning, not always just going hard for 5 times a week at spring ball. It's good stuff.
Jaden Blue had that tweet, and we have a question regarding Blue from Jesse 13. He says, how big of a step does Baxter and Blue take in 2024? I'm excited to see what the running back room produces next season, as I think most Longhorn fans are.
I think it should be very exciting for a number of reasons. One, you get, an entire offseason with CJ Baxter to kind of get his body ready, healthy. Let's not forget it was his third carry of his career in which he got a little nicked up on what was a 30-yard run. I don't know if we ever saw him 100%. He might have gotten close as the season progressed, but there were always, a few little nagging injuries that he was dealing with throughout the duration of the season. So that alone should be very exciting. As Rod and Bobby have mentioned, previously, it's time for him to put on, a new set of armor for his body in the weight room. And so that's probably the biggest jump that we'll see from CJ Baxter. And then Jaden Blue, the speed will always be there. And I think that's very encouraging. An extended role will finally be, on his dinner plate next year, I would say. And I very much liked what I saw from Jaden Blue this year when he was given the opportunity to tote the rock. So as long as Texas is having this dominant front that we expect up front again next year, the running lanes will be there, and the improvement with these running backs should continue to see itself on the field regardless of competition. So right now, I'm very excited that not only will they take a jump in their talent alone, but the production will continue to rise as well, because, there's a very strong chance that this offensive line in 2024 is very good.
I'm with CJ. And Rod used that term, man. What a great term. When a freshman has time to put their armor on. Yep. And that's exactly what CJ Baxter needs. He needed another year of legit conditioning, right, to add to what he'd already done. I think that's a big deal. Then you add Jaden Blue. I still think that he showed dramatic improvement as a runner, but we need to realize he sat out his senior year of high school. He sat out his freshman year at Texas. He's just now getting back into the idea of being a football player, a true football player again, in my opinion. So I'm really excited about what Jaden Blue looks like next year, because he looked really good in spots this year. Then you have other guys, Jarrett Gibson coming in, Christian Clark, Savion Red, Tre Wisner that we talked about a little bit. A number of different pieces to the puzzle that I think are going to be interesting. I feel like Blue and Baxter are your main two guys next year, but let's see what happens in the spring, and let's see what happens with these injuries.
Hey, and above anything else, the biggest progression for both of those guys has to come in pass protection, because that was the thing. As a true freshman, running backs aren't necessarily, adapted to taking on 230-pound linebackers screaming down the field. And obviously Jaden Blue is working at a disadvantage physically, but that's the biggest jump these guys have to take as well. That's probably just as important as what we'll see between the tackles, in my eyes. So this spring is going to be big for both of them.
We got a super chat from Antonio Harris. He says, Blue reminds me of Gibbs in Detroit with more weight. Love the kid.
Boy, that would be huge if he could be that good.
Yeah.
That would be huge. I'm not sure he has the same level of elusiveness as Jahmyr Gibbs. He has great speed, though, and he has great hands. I think he may have better hands than Jahmyr Gibbs. Jaden Blue is a good pass catcher.
Yep.
And then we have one other super chat from Ron S. He says, thanks for the information, for answering his question a little bit ago. Ron, we thank you for the super chat.
Thank you, Ron.
All right, guys. Well, let's talk about one more thing before we get out of here. We touched on it at the beginning of the show, but Junior Day here in 10 days on January 20th. What can Texas fans expect? There's going to be a lot of kids there, a lot of talent on the 40 acres. Who are some of the higher name prospects that will be on campus?
Man,
do you have enough time? There's 40 plus, CJ. Seriously, like 20 plus 4 and 5 stars, right?
Hey, we just went through the list earlier, and I think we went through 40 names, maybe 45 names of guys that we are expecting on campus. It's really exciting. I mean, I'm a sucker for getting these guys, these offensive linemen on campus, pretty early. Bobby, you mentioned the kid out of San Francisco, John Mills, coming in as well. Lamont Rogers, Michael Fasusi, Marcus Garcia, Jonte Newman, a potential Tyler Thomas appearance as well. It's a loaded group. It really is. Kids are excited about what Texas is like whenever they're winning, and they want to come check it out. So this is a really deep group. I'm excited for it.
Here's my bigger piece on it. This went from being what we thought might be 15 to 20 players showing up. And what has happened in the years past, right? Texas was really pushing for more guys to visit, and never really got across that threshold, even though they ended up with good recruiting classes. This isn't always indicative of where you're going to end up in recruiting. But, dude, the receiver, there's going to be 10 receivers on campus. Think about that. 10 offensive linemen, 8 defensive tackles, 5 linebackers. This is Sark, and I don't want to use the word flexing. Like, he's not flexing on people. University of Texas is a little bit right now. This will be the most star-studded junior day in the state of Texas and in surrounding areas. I think LSU probably is going to have a strong one as well, but considerably stronger than A&M's, which is January 13th. And so I look at it this way, in that this is the start of the process for Texas. And this is exactly what we talked about with, like, how does winning last year impact the future? This is one of the ways. You start being able to select more than just have to recruit, period. And that's just a huge piece.
Bobby, I was going to ask, do you know of another junior day on the 20th?
SMU. Yeah, that kind of tells the story, right? Ohio State has one on the 20th. Missouri has one on the 20th. Texas isn't going to fight for many guys. Maybe they'll fight for an Ohio State guy or two, but they're not going to fight SMU, for example.
Yep. Texas Tech, Texas A&M on the 13th. Baylor's on the 28th, the weekend after. TCU having a small one on the 20th as well. So that's about it that I've come to know. Texas is really monopolizing that weekend on the in-state approach. That's
Jabari Antoine, by the way, one of the top 2 or 3 players in the state of Louisiana, going to be in for the January 20th weekend. So it's not just the state of Texas. Brandon Brown out of O'Galley, Florida, expected in. Amari Winston, the tight end out of Georgia, expected in. We'll learn more and more, I think, over the next week, if there's going to be even more. The question I now have is, how many commitments might Texas push for, given they're having so many in simultaneously? I also would say this: expect some of these guys to show up on Friday night. We know that. You know that, CJ. Sometimes Texas will bring in a handful on Friday night to make sure they get the attention they want and deserve, or have them stay over and meet again on Sunday, the 21st. So it could be it's not going to be a full 3-day weekend. It could be a partial 3-day weekend, if that makes sense. And it's centered around the January 20th date.
Okay, guys. Well, before we get out of here, Bobby, let people know what they can expect later today, right here on Texas Football.
Yeah, absolutely. Me and Rod are getting together for State of the Program today. We've got a bunch of stuff we want to talk about, including the situation across the board on the depth chart and where we think Texas needs to look better and reinforce, maybe, I guess the best way to put it, for 2024 season. Also going to talk a little bit about some things going on behind the scenes in recruiting. And then tonight, CJ, Rod, and Ray Peters get together for the live stream. And of course, we're all, just to be clear, with David Benda's announcement yesterday afternoon, we're now awaiting Quinn Ewers and Jahdae Barron. Those 2 decisions are big for the Longhorns, as well as any portal news that comes up, be it CJ Daniels, Jamari Caldwell. or another official visitor over the weekend to join Silas Bolden, the wide receiver out of Oregon State, and Kendrick Blackshire, the linebacker out of Duncanville by way of the University of Alabama.
Well, guys, be sure to hit that like and subscribe button. We would appreciate that. And ring the bell so you're notified anytime a video is posted or anytime we go live here with breaking news right here on Texas Football. And thank you for the super chats. Thank you for tuning in. We got to thank Adam Lowy and the Lowy Law Firm. Thank you, Manscaped, for sponsoring as well. And for Bobby Burton and CJ Vogel, I'm Blake Monroe, and we'll see you tomorrow morning.
Hook 'em.